John Ziola, if you haven't met me before, I run the group, Steel City InfoSec. If you're not here for Steel City InfoSec, you're in the wrong place. There's the door. We have Kevin Gennuso, who's going to give us a great talk tonight about some of his experience with proximity cards and RFID style technology. He has a lot of experience in this area, and we have a bunch of fun things up here too. If you'd like to take a look after the talk, I brought a bunch of hardware on how we can, things that you can use to play with this. And next month will be a hands-on lab, so we'll be using this hardware. The plan is to set up a couple stations, and we can use the hardware and actually see how this stuff works. Read some cards, play some cards. I'm working on getting an actual access controller and reader, and so we'll have a whole setup there. So that'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be fun. One thing that I do want to mention, I wanted to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this quarter, which is Arista. If you guys have never heard of Arista before, I don't know where you've been. They're doing some really cool things in networking and switching. I personally have used them for tap aggregation. They have a good 7150S, which I have used for tap aggregation, and we use that to kind of feed a lot of our security tools, and it works really well. So if you guys have any needs in that area, let me know. I can hook you up with those guys. But big shout out to them for helping us out with hosting, with sponsoring this event. That's pretty much all I got. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Gennuso and his talk on the problem with Prox.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming out. Hopefully this is some interesting information to pass along. I've had some really good, success with explaining this issue to a couple of different organizations and actually seeing changes be made to their infrastructure to accommodate some of these vulnerabilities. So get right to it. We'll structure it like this, tell you who I am, background of the problem, some of the threats that these access control systems kind of face, and then some mitigations, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. So my name is Kevin Gennuso. I am an advanced persistent Pittsburgher. I use that joke too much, but worked in the city for the last 20-something years, 18 of that doing cybersecurity. I'm kind of purple team. I've been on the red and the blue side of life, and I enjoy working in both very much. And I'll talk your ear off about this stuff, so don't get me started. So the background, why are we doing this? 125 megahertz, or I should say kilohertz, sorry. 125 kilohertz Prox card credentials are used in about 80% of all deployments for this type of, keyless entry, right? You're just walking up and tapping a badge to a reader. Nearly 100% of these use a back-end protocol called WIGE that has its own very interesting security vulnerabilities, and we'll talk about it. This is not new in any way, this research. Everything I'm going to be telling you here is pretty well known out in the world, right? The first that I could find presented at DEF CON was in 2009. So nothing new here. It's almost an annual topic at Black Hat, B-Sides, DerbyCon, local cons, right? Saw a talk last year about the BLE key. It was done by some guys at Optiv. We have one sitting right there, and we'll talk more about what that thing can do. So I guess one of the other things is the attack technology has really improved. Stuff to play around with these frequencies and to read and write cards has become pocket-sized, even like quarter-sized. So the fact that the technology is taking off so much, and it seems like that industry that is selling this stuff really isn't keeping up. They're really not saying anything to their customers about any of this. And I know that because last year I had the opportunity to speak at the ISC Squared Security Congress in Anaheim, which is merged with a conference called ACIS, which I didn't know anything about going into it, but it turns out it's the largest physical security conference in the US. So over here is a guy with a really awesome turnstile. This guy's got a bulletproof door. This guy's got a police baton that can really beat a dude. That's what that conference is about. And this Prox technology was everywhere. And I went up to some of the vendors. I actually started taking a list just walking through the vendor floor. Okay, who supports Prox 2? You know, and I ended up with like 14 or 15 vendors before I just gave up and was sick of typing on my phone. I mean, it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. And so I went to a couple of guys, and there were a couple of the booths, and I was like, give me your technical person. You know, let me talk to the technical person who knows this stuff. And it was always like some kind of dodgy answer. Well, you could increase the bit length of your cards. Yeah, okay, but if I can still read those cards because it's unencrypted, what's the point, right? So, so there's a real disconnect between the people who are the users and the system owners on the security of these systems compared to how IT people kind of see these things. You know? So the heart of it is the legacy HID Prox 2 and other contactless cards are unencrypted. So you know, you hold the card up to a reader and the card is going to give up the ghost. What's interesting about that is, you know, the physical security guys will say, well, we disabled the card. No, you didn't. You disabled access using that card. The card doesn't know it's dead, right? So if you have a card that's no longer valid on a system, it's still going to give up some sort of information, okay? So these type of cards are susceptible to cloning. They're susceptible to brute forcing because of the first thing, right? If I can read a card that was once active and I can sequentially increment and go up and up and up or down and down and down, maybe I'll get a valid card, right? There's also very sensitive information printed on these cards. I'll show you one of the screenshots, but there's actually a good chunk of information about that credential printed right at the bottom. And usually there's like 3 additional digits, sometimes 4, right before that, and that's your credential. That's what allows you in. And of course you can read those 3 digits if it's unencrypted. Again, dozens of companies still support this thing and sell it as a secure solution, and I don't see a lot of upselling from these organizations saying, hey, look, what you're using is really bad. What we just sold you 4 years ago, horrible, right? Nobody wants to say that, right? So that's kind of where we are. The other interesting side, aside from just the actual wireless piece of this, is the back end. So WIGAN protocol doesn't support authentication. It's a very closed, you know, was never really thought of as a system where you need authentication. It's like a bus protocol almost, where certain signals are sent from the access controllers that say to, you know, some door lock, hey, unlock for 5 seconds and then relock. So because that protocol has no authentication, if you can somehow send direct signals over the WIGAN back end, you kind of don't even need any of these cards or encryption or, you know, readers, any of it, right? So the embedded devices, these access controllers, are what are actually doing the signaling. They are like the interface between the TCP/IP network and the WIGAN backend. Okay, and these things are typically embedded Linux boxes. They're usually installed with the defaults. Vendors either don't know to change them, or they've always just done that, right? They are forgotten in the patch management cycle. They're computers, but people generally overlook them as devices that they need to worry about patching or checking for default creds or this kind of thing, right? A lot of obscurity by the vendors. You can't go to HID and say, let me look at the source code for your access control boards. You know, it's just not going to happen. So it's unfortunate. It's, you know, especially for what these things are doing and regarding physical access to things like, you know, banks, hospitals, I mean, you name it. This is deployed out everywhere. I'm sure who has Prox technology in their environment, in the room, right? So lots of places. Okay, so we'll talk about first the cloning threats, and we'll just go down the list. I'm not saying this is a comprehensive list, but it's a pretty good one. So number one is your cheap Chinese cloner. So $20 on eBay, and it even comes with some blanks, so that's handy. Clones a single card at a time. No storage capabilities. Power goes away, so does the last credential they grabbed. Right. Limited read distance. We're talking a few centimeters max with this thing. There's what it looks like. Buy it now, 20 bucks. You know, very simple device, right? But with this, I'm making 10 copies of my badge or of any badge that I happen to come across, or you know, it's only cloning and that's it. But still, it's I would say that making 10 copies of a key to your house would be a bad idea. Okay, then we have the RFID. I actually brought mine. This was $100 at DEF CON 2 years ago. Slick little board. It's an open source design, so that the actual hardware you can make it yourself, and the firmware that runs on it also open source. It's going after the Prox 2 stuff. It's all it can do, a little bit higher up in the frequency range. So it can do things like MyFare cards, which are used for things like transit systems. Chicago has it. I haven't tested to see if Pittsburgh uses it. I have a sneaking suspicion, based on what's printed on the card, that I can clone my Connect card. Yeah, $100, USB controlled and powered, which is cool. So you can, it has a few different modes where you can read, write, or emulate. So if you want to go into emulate mode and you've captured a credential and you've stored it in memory here, you can just connect a USB battery to it and walk around, and you now have that card repeating over and over and over again to whatever reader you want to point it to. Native storage is 2 credentials, but that can be increased with some updates. Limited read distance. Again, this stuff is pretty low power, so you have to be pretty close to be able to actually use it. But one cool thing is there is a scripted brute force attack. So like I mentioned, these, if you find a dead card, you might be able to increment and get a valid card. There are actually scripts to do it with this thing. So pretty powerful. This is the output from what you'd see on an RFID. So I set the tag to the HID Prox 2, turn it into a reader, and there it is pulling credentials from the card. Now the part that's red is the 3-digit facility code. Now if you remember, I said that there's information that's printed on the card and then information that's secret. The stuff that's revealed is information that's printed on the card. That's the card number, right? And these come in batches from HID, big, tall batches, sequentially numbered. Okay, so if you get one, you're probably going to be able to get another one, lower or higher. And then that facility code is essentially the Wigen password that says this is our domain, right? This is our Wigen implementation. And so whenever you're actually talking to the door controller, you're saying, here is our facility code, and here's my card number. That goes to a back-end system that says, does this person have access to this particular door? Yes or no signal is sent to the door controller. There you go. That's how the whole thing works. And yeah, I just got that 3-digit password because I'm encrypted. And the thing about that 3-digit facility code is that it's a very difficult thing to change. Once it's exposed, now you're talking about going to your entire access control system and changing that everywhere. Okay, a very painful thing to change. So you really don't want it exposed in the first place. Okay, this is a video of me using the RFID. The reason this video was produced was because I gave this presentation to our loss prevention team, minus this video, and they said, you know what, the slide deck really doesn't do it, we need a wow factor. So wow, I just opened the door with a computer, okay? And after seeing this, we have now made the move to encrypted cards, and it actually did drive change. But they literally asked for a wow factor because the PowerPoint didn't do that, so there you go. Prox Mark III. Got one, thanks to John. A little more capable, this device. 125 kilohertz plus the high frequency stuff, which includes the MyFare cards. About $200 pre-built. If you want to do it yourself, you can get it cheaper. Again, with the limited read distance, small little thing, size of a deck of cards, right? So you're not going to get a whole lot out of it, but it does allow you to do cloning very quickly. It can output to USB storage. You can do the scripted brute force attacks. The interface is probably the easiest of all these things to use, just as far as moving around to different types of cards and setting replays and reads and writes. Great device, very cool. There it is, little baby. So, just talking about the brute force attack a little bit, you started a known good place. Doesn't matter if the card was good, bad, lost, whatever it is, and then go up and down that numeric sequence to try to gain initial access or maybe to gain elevated access. So maybe you already have a valid badge, but you figure that maybe the CEO has a badge that's way earlier than yours, and maybe that'll get you into some more interesting doors. Another trick would be to, so I've seen places where they just have these badges sitting out, in a stack, getting ready to make new ones for visitors or something like that. Just get a peek at one real quick, and then start going backwards. Now, limited read distance, right? I keep hearing this, but it kind of depends on how you approach your target, right? Social engineering is always a thing. And so, what if you were walking around and just happen to have a clipboard? Don't you look so authoritative with a clipboard, right? Ask you questions with a clipboard, So, somebody came up with ClipHome, okay? Clipboard, and it's got an R fiddler in the bottom, or a Prox mark, or whatever, right? You could go ask them anything, and they're going to tell you because you have a clipboard. And so get the exact spelling of that name, so get that badge. Let me get it off your badge. Okay, write that down. It's two N's. Yeah, okay, got it. Pretty slick way, I thought, of trying to social engineer somebody into actually giving you their credential for a short period of time, enough time to actually clone the thing. Okay, BLE key. Oh, baby. That is BLE key. Miniature little buddy with storage powered by battery. And the way this thing works is you actually have to connect it to a reader. So you have to have physical access to a reader. Not terribly difficult to open one of those things up. And this connects to the wagon back end. And so it can actually read signals that are sent from the door controller to the doors. And it can also grab credentials. And it can also transmit those up to 1,000 credentials over Bluetooth. So if I have one of these planted somewhere and a reader somewhere, I can just walk up to it, suck down the credentials, walk away, go make my 1,000 cards or whatever I want to do. Or send it over to one of these little buggers and transmit any of those credentials. Again, this was by the Optiv guys. 1,500. That's it. Yeah, I hit it. The Tastic RFID thief. This is the one. This is the big daddy. Okay. You could. It's the original design, and this came out 4 years ago, and somebody actually brought one to B-Sides Pittsburgh a couple years back. I remember. And the original design used an Arduino, but you could very easily substitute the Arduino with the BLE key and increase the functionality of this thing, to be able to transmit. Stores thousands of credentials, uses a modified reader, which is what's so cool about it. So if you go to a parking garage downtown or something like that, and you see people presenting their cards, those readers can go about 3 feet, okay? Much larger range for collecting the same stuff, right? It's battery powered. I'll show you a picture of it when you see the battery setup. It's just hilarious. You could essentially build your briefcase of doom type scenario. The batteries last about an hour. And so the way I've seen it described is you go do the cell phone dance in a busy place for an hour. And the cell phone dance is this. Oh, yeah. You're just on the cell phone the whole time, walking around, and people are walking past you within 3 feet. You got credentials. So there's that mess. That's that mess. So right here, that's the actual reader. That's what comes inside the device. Everything on the left is the upgrades, the mods to be able to do the trick. Really, the power is that giant antenna. You know, that's what you're getting there. Beyond 3 feet, you're not going to be able to energize the circuit inside the Prox card and actually get a read back. So this is about the maximum that you can go with this technology. But in the close range, you know, it's a pretty effective attack. There you go, briefcase of data. And yeah, saves off to memory or displays on the LCD screen if you do that, the whole build out. This is and all the schematics and everything to build one of these is, you know, it's out on the internet. Hard to find the readers though. Everybody's gobbling up the spare readers. Okay, so sounds horrible. But wait, there's more. So we'll talk about some of the other ones. Vulnerabilities, patch management, this kind of stuff. So everyone's favorite, default credentials. We've never seen this before in the industry where somebody would use a default credential. I mean, it's just insane. Root blank, root, admin, vendor. These tend to be full access accounts to the miniature little Linux instance that's running on these things. You know, anytime you got a root on a computer on a network, that's a really good place to be. So it'd be unfortunate for one of those endpoints to be your security system that you're trying to keep people out with. They're very rarely changed by the vendor. If you got a vendor who install, you know how they install this stuff, there's a very good chance that they do it the same way in every implementation. And again, making changes to these particular accounts after the fact is a very impactful thing, because what happens is you have this central system that's constantly communicating with all these door controllers, access control panels, and saying, hey, you know, let me update your credential cache, because there's a cache on each one of these things with credentials. You know, let me make sure, you know, you have, or I have your logs. And it's actually logging in as root to perform these functions, okay, from the central server. So if you change that root password after the fact, and you got an implementation of 500, 1,000, you know, who knows, endpoints, it's going to be very difficult to change that password because you're going to have to change it everywhere all at once, much like the facility code in the wagon side. So it really stinks to try to fix this after the fact. Man, do they love unencrypted protocols on these things. My goodness, isn't Telnet the greatest, you know? I'll show you a really funny screenshot coming, but if it has a web-based interface, it's of course over HTTP and probably doesn't require authentication to access that management page. You know, the type of traffic that's flowing over these unencrypted protocols: authentication traffic, management traffic, centralized synchronization. So all those credentials that you're, you know, using throughout the environment, they're getting pushed around over unencrypted protocols between the central server and these embedded devices. Then you got some UI flaws with the management interface. Right, super duper. So in 2012, this guy, I'm not going to try to say his last name, but I've seen him do a couple talks at Black Hat and DEF CON. Really great presenter. I suggest you look him up and watch his YouTubes because they're really good stuff. He presented that he found a vulnerability in the web management interface of one of these HID controllers. And then provided a proof of concept Python script that allowed you to, with an IP address, you just type in the IP address, and it uses the default credentials for these devices to unlock and lock the door. Okay, simple Python script, right? Again, with my guys with the wow factor, they just didn't believe me. So I took his script and changed it a little bit so that it didn't lock the door. It just unlocked it. That's all it did. And then I took one of his guys and said, okay, you got to come see this mess. Walked up with my corporate laptop, ran sesame.exe, click, The door unlocks, and he gets no alert. He calls down to the security desk. Okay, did you see that door go? What do you mean? Who's the last person to badge in? No, I did that like 10 minutes ago. Who else? Could not believe that there was a Python script that just unlocked that door. And he got zero indication, no alert whatsoever. That door would not lock again until I sent it the command to lock. So crazy, whatever. The faults aren't reported to the central server. I don't know why. There's what the management interface looks like. The particular devices, if you're interested in have HID Vertex access control systems in your environment, the models you need to worry about are the V1000, V2000, and E400. Those three models in particular are known to be vulnerable to that particular attack. So, just FYI. But if you're scanning your network and you come across one of these babies, and then you got your ye olde custom protocol, because it's always a good idea to do that. So this was just discovered a couple months ago by Trend Micro. They found that they could have full control over one of these devices, same devices, using a single UDP packet. Full control, okay? The reason for that is they have a daemon that runs. It's called their Discovery D. And if you query it in the right way, this daemon comes back and says, hey, I'm this version of controller, I'm this model, this is my IP address, this is the name you have given me, And that service runs as root, as it should, and it has a command injection vulnerability. So literally, you do what a normal query should look like, give it 3 extra characters, and then give it your Linux command. And away you go. You can now create entries in Etsy password, you can, whatever you want to do with full control on the box, right? One UDP packet. So who is even thinking about patching these things, right? Is it on anyone's radar? It's an atypical upgrade cycle, right? These are not systems that you might have a policy that says, hey, every 5 years we throw away our laptops and get new ones because they're old and terrible, right? Doesn't work like that with these systems. These things will stay in the wall until they break, and that's when they get replaced. Was it one organization where we were finding stuff that had been out there since the 90s, and never looked at, and broke horribly when we ran a vulnerability scan against them. Just a vulnerability scan, dead. So patches make sense to Linux admins, right? To IT people, patching these things makes sense. Doesn't really make sense to the guy that installs closed circuit TV cameras, and that's really the primary. These are installer guys, right? They're putting cable down and they're turning devices on, making sure everything talks, and that's it. They're not thinking about hardening it from an IT perspective, certainly. Okay, now this is my favorite slide, and it's difficult to read, but this is the actual security bulletin for that UDP vulnerability, okay, from the vendor. And if you look at line 2, they're telling the admin to open a command window, log into the controller via telnet using the root account. Okay? That's the vendor telling you how to patch their system, okay, over FTP and telnet.
And then you can overwrite the file, right? Like you upload the new copy or the patched version.
That's right.
So not only you're logging in as root, you clearly have FTP access to modify those as well.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. You're transferring those brand new unvulnerable binaries, right?
Sure.
And now who knows if it's vulnerable because you just did it over clear text. Super duper, guys. Again, with the security by obscurity, like nobody knows this junk. Nobody knows that this stuff is floating around out there, or what the real, they say kinetic impact. This is real world Internet of Things before Internet of Things was ever Internet of Things, right? These systems have been deployed for years and years and years, and this is, you get to it and you can affect physical change in an environment. You can unlock the doors of an environment. That stupid UDP thing, will respond to a broadcast packet. So you send that, whatever evil command you want to send, you can send it to one IP address, and it'll do everything on that subnet. Okay? Like, just awful, awful. There's never an in-house expert for these systems. You might, your loss prevention person might know how to add users, subtract them from the system, this kind of stuff, the inner workings of the actual access control software. But they don't know anything about what's actually going on the back end. And as it turns out, it doesn't seem like the vendors do a whole lot either. And this is a big one. The physical security teams really aren't too interested in having their stuff poked and prodded. It's gotten a lot of feedback from these guys. And I understand, like, I'm messing with something, again, that is in your domain, and you have a very closed mindset for your domain, but it does cross that IT boundary, and it's worth auditing like any other IT system. And then it's kind of broken at the core a little bit too. The wagon thing is rough because the readers and access control systems are only there to actually do the logic. If I know what a proper wagon signal looks like to unlock the door with a credential, if I have physical access, I can actually just send that signal and bypass the entire everything. Now you're talking about getting access to physical cable and that kind of stuff. So not necessarily something that's just going to happen. But again, if you're in a high security environment, you might want to think about where those access control panels are placed, where the readers are placed, anything that might be able to send a signal over those wires. Because that traffic can be sniffed, replayed, and you will never get detected by a centralized system because you're communicating very raw, at the rawest layer of this thing. Some mitigations. Let's talk about something happy for a change. Okay, how do we protect ourselves? RFID shields are a way of doing it. Now you get marginal performance. You really got to find the right device out there, the right protection for that. And I think John has some information on that we'll talk about for August, if not after this. But in some situations, a good solution. A better solution is to go towards the encrypted stuff. And the thing about that, though, is so in the typical deployment, like we've seen through this entire presentation, vendor tends to install their stuff with the defaults, right? So encrypted solution is fantastic, right? It's a great idea, but not if they ship with the default master encryption keys, right? Which is what they tend to do. And those have been leaked, and a process for cloning encrypted cards is out there, right? So if you're gonna make this move, do it right from the start and make sure that the vendor is going to change that for you. And they will change it for you. It's not something that's completely out of left field. They certainly offer the service, but you just have to tell them to do it and know to tell them to do it, which is unfortunate. Another way, if you're using the crappy stuff, and you're at least you have visual confirmation on everybody that walks in the door. You got a crappy card, but you hit that button and up comes the person's picture on a guard screen or something like that. That works too. I mean, having somebody do verification like that is a great way to mitigate. Or if you have the readers that actually do the badge plus the PIN. So it doesn't matter if you have the badge credential, you still need to know the PIN to get in the door. That's not a bad way of doing it too. And tamper resistance on the readers, which all of these readers actually come with. You have to turn it on. Not there by default. It's like everything wrong is there by default, but everything right, you have to do something. The tamper resistance will actually fire an alert off to your centralized system and say, hey, this reader has been compromised, and you can choose to take action like just shut off the reader, do that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, embedded access control devices, like anything running an operating system, it's a computer, call it what you will, it's a computer, treat it like a computer, patch it, do all the right things. That's all I've got. Thank you so much.